Hi guys, my name is Bonsai Danilo and you're welcome to another edition of Danilo React. Today we'll be doing something different. We'll be doing a first official book review. It's a book titled The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gewande. Amazing book guys, amazing book. Anyways, if you're new to this channel, welcome. And I pledge that you watch this video to the end if you want to actually get the best out of it, because I bet you this is about to be an information minefield. Okay, watch it to the end. If you're a returning viewer, thank you for coming back. Anyways, let's get forward. Atul Gewande is a surgeon, right, with specialty in oncological surgery and patient care and safety. So let's get into the book. Now, Atul Gewande was sitting with his friends, his other colleagues, surgeons, right? They were discussing, sharing war stories, exchanging, telling each other what happened in one theater round or what happened in the other theater rounds, and they were discussing. And one of these stories came up, like one of his friends was talking about a guy who came in with a stab wound, okay, to his abdomen. And he was relatively very stable, so they weren't really rushing to maybe take the guy to the theater because they thought they had time. And then of a sudden the guy started decompensating and they had to be flying around, rushing the guy to the theater. And when they got into the theater, they discovered that it was not as simple. It wasn't really a very simple wound that they had anticipated before. It was really a more severe wound. The stab knife had actually gotten to the guy's aorta, so the guy was bleeding massively internally. And then also there was this other procedure, maybe it was like a herniorrhaphy. Yeah, it was a herniorrhaphy. And then they were doing the herniorrhaphy and suddenly the person went into heart attack. Okay, they had done their labs previously before taking the patient to the theater and everything turned out well. So the guy was in heart attack and they were like, why is this guy in heart attack? Why is he having a heart attack? Everybody was surprised in the theater. The anesthetist thought that maybe he was bleeding. He asked the surgeon to check. There was no bleeding anywhere. Okay. The other option was maybe the guy is having poor perfusion, but no, his saturation was okay. So why was he in heart attack? And then finally now they discovered that he had, maybe after like 15 minutes, they discovered that he had maybe a low potassium level in the lab testings that they did pre-op. And then now, during the procedure itself, they gave him a wrong dose of potassium, right? And then they overdosed him with potassium, and then he went into heart attack because hyperkalemia is like one of the major causes of heart attack. And it was discovered like 15 minutes later. And then Atul Gewande was like asking himself that, okay, here are my colleagues, here are my friends, right? They have trained for several years. They are obviously very good at what they do, okay? But now they are still making these errors, right? Why are they still making these errors despite their years of training, despite their years of training? Okay, why are they still making these errors? They went for specialization and all of this in order to be better, but now this kind of petty errors are still coming up. So why is this still happening? So he went forward now to do his research, and he discovered that essentially, okay, there are three major reasons why we fail as human beings, as professionals. There are three major reasons why we fail. The first reason is necessary fallibility. Okay, now when we talk about necessary fallibility, this is in a sense saying that, okay, you set out to do something that you cannot do, essentially, that is so out of your reach that you cannot do. Take for example, maybe you're a chef, okay, and then you get up tomorrow morning and then you say, okay, I want to go to the moon. It's impossible, right? You won't be able to go to the moon. You don't first of all have the knowledge required to take you to the moon. Okay, so in this instance, you are bound to fail. It's obvious. It's self-evident. You will fail. Now, the two other reasons why we fail are totally within our scope. It's not something that we cannot do. It's totally within our scope. The second one is ignorance. Okay, you're ignorant about something that you want to do. And if you do not study, if you don't find knowledge pertaining to that thing, right, you're bound to fail. If you're ignorant about it, there's no way you won't succeed. You're bound to fail. Now, ignorance was a problem in, the old ages, like the dark ages. They had a problem of ignorance. But now in this 21st century and maybe the last half of the 20th century, ignorance is no longer a problem, guys. Like, we are literally in an information sea. We have so much information this time that we don't even know what to do with it. So when someone is actually ignorant about something, it's actually a fault of his or hers. Okay, and then the third and most important one is ineptitude. Ineptitude is the third and most important reason why we fail. Okay, because this information is already available. It's in books, it's in textbooks, it's on the internet, it's on TVs, it's everywhere. The information is already available. There are schools that train you in your particular domain or your particular field. Okay, but you then take this information and you don't practice it well. Okay, like you actually know what to do. Okay, but you don't do it well. You don't apply the procedures and the sequence of events necessary to be able to bring out the desired outcome. This is ineptitude. It's not because you don't know, it's not because you don't know the procedures, but it's just because you haven't applied it the right way to bring out the desired result. This is the third reason why we fail. And then he also went further to examine, and also he came out with 3 different types of problems that we face in society as a whole. Right. The first one being simple problems. Simple problems are problems that, like the word says, they are simple. Like maybe cooking like something, or maybe baking a cake is simple, right? There's a recipe, you follow the recipe, okay? You mix the dough, you put it in the oven, and it's going to bring you a wonderful cake if you follow this recipe. Or that's a simple problem. You solve it, simple, no problem, no qualms there, okay? You solve the problem, you bring out the recipe, everything. Every single time that you follow this recipe, you're going to bring out this exact same cake. Okay, that's a simple problem. Then he went further again to identify a different type of problem called the complicated problems. Now, complicated problems are problems that maybe, doing a laparotomy, maybe to fix a ruptured or a perforated peptic ulcer. That's a complicated problem, okay? Because it involves multiple steps, multiple procedures, multiple sequence of events that have to be done in a certain way and within a certain given amount of time for the required outcome to be. Or maybe, going to the moon or launching a rocket to go to the moon. That's a complicated problem. But now these problems can be learned. That's the difference. They can be learned, okay? And if they are learned and practiced very well, the desired outcome will always be, when they are learned and practiced very well, you always have the desired outcome. Like every single time, you always have the desired outcome. Then there's a third set of problems. Called the complex problems. Now, in this set of problems, experience is not necessary. Okay, it's not like experience is necessary, but it's not like the sole determining factor of whether you'll be able to solve such a problem. You see, you can have experience about these problems, but the experience does not necessarily mean if you encounter such a problem in future, you'll be able to solve it. And such problems are like maybe raising a child. Okay, you can raise one child this way. Okay, he grows up and is a very excellent maybe medical doctor, or maybe pilot, or maybe musician, or anything. Okay, but the fact that you raise this child this way and the child turned out good doesn't imply that raising another child will have the same outcome, or if you follow the same steps, you have the same desired result. Because human beings are complex, right? Human beings are complicated. Human beings are like that. You cannot apply one theory for one human to another and expect the same outcomes. They are variable set of outcomes. But now, your past experience can help you, right? But it won't be sufficient, because what one child needs it could be totally different from what the other child needs. Okay, so we went forward to identify these 3 classical problems that we have. Now, in this our information age in the 21st century, right? Our problem is no longer knowledge or information. Our problem is that we have so much information during this time that we literally don't know what to do with it. Okay, take for example in the medical field. Okay, I'm using a lot of medical examples because I'm a medical personnel, so bear with me. Okay, take for example in the medical field, there are over 35,000 diagnoses, right, that WHO has classified as things that can happen wrong, that can go wrong with a human being. Over 35,000 diagnoses, and for these diagnoses there are over 50,000 different procedures or ways that have been put forward in order to solve these problems. 50,000, okay, and health professionals, doctors, nurses, medical laboratory scientists, all of these people are supposed to master these problems in order to solve human disease. How is that possible? Is it really possible? Is it feasible? And this applies not just in medicine but in other fields. Like take for example the construction industry. Okay, there's a myriad of things to be done. There's architectural work, there's engineering, there's the construction itself, there's plumbing to be done, there's electrification to be done, and all of this. And there are many different procedures that come in place. So there's a lot of information out here, and what we are suffering from is how to use this information the right way to be able to produce the desired outcome. That is why our biggest problem in this information age is ineptitude and no longer ignorance. Unlike in the dark ages when people were ignorant of things, right? That was the reason why they failed. In this our own age, why we fail is because of ineptitude, right? We have so much information that we do not know what to do with it. And even when we acquire this information, to actually apply it in a sequential and a chronological way in order to have a desired outcome, it's really, really difficult. So in this dilemma that we are in, okay, we are professionals. We want to make our occupations better. We want to make our professions better. We want to see human outcome improve. We want to see human health improve. We want to see construction of good buildings. We want to see cooking of good food. We want to see, justice in the courts. Everybody wants excellence for professionals, okay? But are professionals ready to be able to bring forth this problem? Now, with this information drought, okay, professionals came up with a way in order to solve this problem, right? This way was to specialize and to sub-specialize, okay? In the construction field, we had to have architects now, because everyone, unlike before when, we had this like master builder term, someone that was responsible for all the construction process that was going on, okay? One person or maybe a group of people or maybe two people were responsible for all the construction problems that were going on. When things started getting more complex, when more complex buildings were starting to surface, this type of mentality had to go off. We have to have some sort of a division of labor, right? We had to have architects, we had to have electrical engineers, we had to have plumbers, we had to have people actually doing the construction. We have to have internal decor people, designing people, and everything in order to bring this piece of beautiful building into place. Same in the medical field, right? Information is drowning us. Like past years, maybe 100 years ago, 7 years of medical school, or even less than 7 years of medical school. I'm talking of the Cameroonian context, right? Because we go medical school is 7 years. Maybe 7 years of medical school was enough, right, to be able to practice as a medical professional with the given information that was available. But presently, after 7 years of medical school, you are just qualified to be a general practitioner. And as a general practitioner, you are so limited because you have studied a lot of information, but you don't have a focus, because there's so much information that you cannot limit yourself. You won't be, how do I call it? You won't be really productive if you don't focus on one particular field and actually master the skill set in this field in order to be really efficient. If you just spread your wings out loud, you will know a lot of things, like you'll be a jack of all trades but a master of none, right? After 7 years of medical school, you have to do, like, maybe you are going for surgery, you have to do again like maybe 4 years of general surgery, and after that you maybe do another fellowship for maybe a particular subspecialty in surgery, okay? That is what it takes to be able to be a good professional, okay? But now, in all the fields around the world, specialists have evolved and sub-specializations are coming up. But is this still enough? Is this still enough to solve human problem, or is this still enough to solve human error? Despite our specializations, like in Atul Gewande and his friend's case, they were sitting and discussing and they had specialized and had years of experience, but they were still making these errors, these very minute but very evident errors that can lead to death, or can lead to very catastrophic outcomes. Okay, so what then can be the solution to all of this? Because we have discovered that specializing further and further would not still eliminate these errors. What then will be able to take us from this place right, that we are presently today to this place, what will be able to take us from a maybe 8% efficiency to maybe a 99% efficiency? Guys, I tell you now, the answer is found in a checklist. Yeah, I know a lot of you will be thinking, checklist, what do you mean by a checklist? Like the word says, a checklist, a list that checks. Simple, right? For those of you who don't know what I mean by a checklist is simply a list, okay, of checks that you do in order to ensure that a given procedure or a given process is intact as it is supposed to be. Now, don't get this twisted, guys. A checklist will not teach you how to be a doctor. A checklist will not teach you how to be a chef. A checklist will not teach you how to be an engineer. Okay? The checklist will only ensure that you be the perfect doctor that you set out to be, that you be the perfect engineer that you set out to be, that you be the perfect chef that you set out to be. That is what a checklist will do. And I'm not just saying this out of maybe I read one random book somewhere and I saw that a checklist. I've actually practiced it in my own life. Okay, and it works like magic. It takes you from here, right, to here, because you already know these things. You are in training, you are training, right? You know these things, you know these procedures, you have learned them, you have studied them in class, you have studied them in school, you have practiced them in the hospital, or maybe you are a chef, you have practiced it in your kitchen and you are cooking every day. But now repetition makes you to start you start to ignore very minute details of this process, and when you ignore enough of these minute details, you start to have very bad adverse effects. Okay, take for example, you're a chef, right, and you have mastered the recipe of, say, I don't know, a plain cake. Okay, and then over the years you have mastered the procedure. Then after some time now, maybe you forget about the recipe. Okay, because a recipe in itself is some sort of a checklist. Okay, you forget about the recipe, you have mastered it, right? You are the specialist on this, you have mastered it, and then you start practicing and practicing. Your memory is bound to fail you. Maybe on a certain day you forget to add maybe salt. Maybe on a certain day you forget to add maybe the required amount of baking soda. Maybe on a certain day you forget to add maybe the required amount of sugar, and this is how you'll be having undesired outcomes. But why is that so? You no longer follow your recipe. Does it mean that you're dull? Does it mean that you don't know what to do? No. Your memory can fail you, and that is okay. Because a lot of people think that a checklist is coming to replace them. No way. A checklist is just coming to make you better. Unlike you who left your recipe and were cooking without, a recipe, another chef who is using his recipe will continue to have the same outcome over and over, and this is desirable. Okay, let's leave the example of the chef. Okay, come now to the medical field. Okay, where I practice daily. Okay, I've been in theater rooms, in ORs, where a checklist has been used before surgical procedures were commenced. Okay, and I can tell you for a fact that on several of these occasions we have actually picked up very important details that if they were missed would have led to very poor patient outcome post-op. Okay, if for example on one of these occasions we were about to cut into this guy's abdomen, and then the surgeon said, stop, let's do a checklist, and along the way we discovered that the required amount of blood for this patient wasn't there. Like the blood wasn't in the theater. Imagine that. And we had to stop and go back to the lab and get the blood before the procedure commenced. Imagine if we started that procedure without that blood. Okay, and all through that procedure that patient actually needed that blood. Imagine if that point came in time when the patient needed that blood and it wasn't there. It could have led to a very poor patient outcome. There are times when we discovered that they hadn't administered antibiotics before the procedure. Okay, and administering antibiotics before a procedure is very essential to patient outcome, because look at, like in surgery, the global killers in surgery: we have anesthesia, we have infections, and we have bleeding. Okay, if we control these, we have controlled like maybe 50% or close to 60% of mortality from surgery is due to these three: anesthesia, infection, and hemorrhaging. and bleeding in general. Okay, so administration of antibiotics before a surgery, before the first incision, at least 30 minutes before the first incision, it's like it's Bible, guys. We don't debate about this. You have to. Now, there are points when we administer the checklist and we discover that, oh, it wasn't there. They haven't given the antibiotics, or they have given it maybe 2 hours before the patient was in the waiting room. And the antibiotics must have surely started weighing out there, or they have already weighed out, and we have to administer it. And I can tell you for a fact that for this surgeon who does a checklist every single time before he does his operations, guys, you look at his records, they are impeccable. Patient time in the hospital is reduced. Patient outcome post-op is perfect. 0 infection rates, right? 0 infection rates, no complications, and his procedures always take very little time in the theater, and the outcome is always excellent. Now, for me as a medical student, procedures like catheterization or maybe lumbar puncture for CSF analysis, okay? After reading this book, I started putting it into practice in my own life. I wanted to see whether this actually works. Okay, I went forward and I started practicing. Anytime before I do a catheterization, I always put in my brain. I have like a mental checklist. Even if I don't write it down, I have like a mental check. I have to like, okay, is this there? 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 Have I done this? Have I done this? Have I done this? Like, because you have to do this to ensure that you are doing what is standard, right? And you are not going to cause this patient more harm than good. Imagine if you go forth and catheterize the patient without wearing maybe a sterile gloves. You might introduce infections into the patient's urethra, or in fact his urinary tract, and the patient comes back, I don't know, 3 months later with a cystitis or urethritis, and it's totally you who caused it. Okay, so I've been doing this and it has worked perfectly, guys. So I'm not saying this out of just that I've read a book or anything. No, I'm saying this because it has actually worked in my own life, and I'm sharing this to you for you to be able to know. So how then do you do a good checklist? Okay, a good checklist just entails that you identify the rate determining steps in a procedure, no matter what field you are in. If you're watching me, no matter what field you are in, you identify the rate determining steps in every procedure that you're doing and put checks in all of these rate determining steps in order to ensure that these steps are done perfectly in the right sequence, and at the end of the day you have the desired result. Period. The rate determining step is simply a step that is very crucial to the process. Like, if this is not done right, then the outcome is inevitably going to be poor. Let's take another example. Say you're a farmer, okay, and you cultivate corn or maize, okay. Normally, harvesting season is in September, October, okay. But before you harvest, you have to plant maybe in March, okay, when the rains come. Now, you go to the farmer's market in order to buy your seedlings or your seeds, okay, and you get your seeds, okay. The next thing is that you should come and till your soil and then cultivate it on fertile soil, obviously, in order to get good results. Now, look at this. 2 farmers, okay, one has a checklist, one doesn't. They know the same procedure, they know the same process that I've just explained to you, okay. Now, one goes, the one with the checklist, he goes, he buys his seedlings, he comes, he tills the soil, and he's about to cultivate his corn, and then he says, okay, this is a rate determining step in my process. I have to ensure that I'm doing the right thing. So he checks, okay, do I have my seedlings? Yes, I have my seedlings, I have my seeds. Now, are these seeds viable? And then all of a sudden you discover that the seeds are not viable, okay. The seeds are not viable, they won't grow well to provide, I don't know, the desired outcome. And then he goes back to the farmer's market and changes it and takes more viable seeds, okay. He bought these seeds the same time with a farmer who doesn't use a checklist. Now, this other farmer comes, he doesn't have a checklist, he has done the same procedure, he has bought the seeds, he has come, he has tilted the soil, tilled his soil, and then he's about to plant, okay. And then he plants these seeds that are not really viable. Now look at the outcomes of both farmers. They did the same procedure, okay? Alright, they have the same knowledge, they did the same procedure. But now this farmer that uses the checklist, he has excellent results in October and September when it comes to harvest. What happens here? Poor results. Did they use the same procedure? Exactly. But what is the difference? What takes you from here to here? The checklist. And a lot of people will be like, what do you mean by a checklist? What do you mean by a checklist? I'm educated, I'm trained, I don't need a checklist. And I tell you today that a checklist is not replacing your education. The checklist is not replacing your mind. The checklist is just there as an aid. As an aid. So if you are a professional in any field, I'm telling you this categorically, right? If you want to take your game from here, from A to A plus, or from B to B plus, or from whatever level you are, if you're a student, you want to take your studies from here to here, you have to identify the right determining steps in your process and put in checks, so that every time you're doing this process, you examine your checks and ensure that everything is in sequence, that you're practicing this the right way. So this is information, right? This is now public information. The thing is left now onto you, who is watching me, to actually decide for yourself. Will you use the checklist? Will you start to administer the checklist in your own life? I know I'm doing mine for my own life and it's working out amazing. So it's left onto you. You decide. Will you administer your own checklist or will you not? If you're a wise person, which I know you are, you start looking for your papers and you start administering your own checklist. You're a medical student watching me today, administer a checklist in all your procedures in your hospital, and you see that you take them from here to here. It's a fact, guys. It's a fact. Anyways, this is my review, this is my commentary, this is my thoughts, these are my thoughts, this is my experience that I've shared with you. Atul Gewande, the Checklist Manifesto. Amazing book, guys, amazing book. I'll encourage you to go and read this book. I'll leave my handles in the description below. So if you want a copy of this book, you can inbox me, or you can inbox me, use any of my handles, my Twitter at danwise237, or you can message me on Facebook or Instagram, guys. I'm there. If you want a copy of this book, Instagram, you message me and it's going to be yours.